I'd like to welcome everybody here for this last session, panel session of the day, and I'd really like to thank Amos for allowing us to have this session and to have all of our guests up here to be able to talk about the topic that we're going to discuss today, which is commercial, civil, and R&D roles in space situational awareness. So just to start off a little bit, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Larry Gunn, and I work at DARPA. I'm one of the space PMs there. And what the purpose of this panel today is to discuss a number of different things, but specifically because we know that there is an increasing role that the government's interested in partnering with both our commercial partners, civil, R&D, and also our educational institutions, that we want to talk about ways in which we can foster that relationship, but also explore ways that we can pull the resources that we have to empower the economic growth and execute the SSA mission of really trying to fulfill what's laid out in the 2010 space policy. So those are some of the things that we wanted to talk about today. And before I go ahead and introduce each of our guests, I just kind of wanted to set the stage a little bit. Since I'm at DARPA, I like to think big and I like to think in the future. And so as I think, what should space situational awareness look like in the future in 20 to 30 years, there's a bunch of ideas that kind of come through my head. I think about why I got involved in space, and I think about, I like science fiction, and I think about some of the things that are out there that you see. So for example, one specific item that comes to mind is when you think about when the American, North and South American countries or continents were discovered, and we had many pilgrimages come across. And we started populating the country, and we had this big, vast territory that needed to be explored. Well, what kind of investment did it take to actually populate that country or that territory and actually move to the point that we have services that we do now? Not only do we have roads, we have airline services, we have communication services across the board, and if we try to apply that to space situational awareness and space itself, that's the kind of stuff that I'm thinking about where we need to be in 20 to 30 years is how do we foster that investment to get out of where the government's primarily involved in that to the point where we have commercial industry and other partners that are involved in it and that's spurring that innovation to head there. So those are the types of thoughts that I have when I think about what is the role that each of these partners have in space situational awareness. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to introduce each of our panel members. First, we have Lori Newman, and Ms. Newman is a member of the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center's Robotic Systems Protection Program. Since 2005, she has managed the Conjunction Assessment, Risk Analysis, or the CARA effort for NASA's unmanned missions and serves as an agency point of contact for the space situational awareness for robotic missions. Next on our panel, we have Dr. Michael Romanowski, who is currently the Federal Aviation Administration's Director of Commercial Space Flight Integration. In this role, he provides leadership and executive direction for the FAA Office of Commercial Space Transportation's 5 operational divisions that are responsible for evaluation and regulation of commercial spaceports, commercial space launches and reentries, and the integration of these operations within the national airspace. He is also responsible for the development and deployment of FAA's commercial space infrastructure programs that support these areas. Next on our panel, we have Mr. Paul Welsh, and he is the Vice President of Business Development of Analytical Graphics Incorporated, or AGI, and is responsible for the development and capture of program opportunities, management of AGI business partners, and the execution of strategic market initiatives, including Commercial Space Operations Center. Mr. Welsh is also the executive sponsor for AGI's Space Data Association activities. He received a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering from Villanova University in 1981, a master's degree in system engineering from the Moore School of University of Pennsylvania in 1984, and an MBA from the Wharton School of University of Pennsylvania in 1998. Next on our panel, we have Mr. Andrew Dova, and he is the president of Provident Access Company, a government affairs technology and satellite consultancy. He is an advisor to the Space Data Association, which he helped to found in 2008. He advises clients, including almost all commercial satellite communication owner-operators who provide government services. His earlier experience includes the private practice of law and various executive positions at international satellite operators, including New Skies and SES. He holds degrees in government and law from Georgetown University and Georgetown University Law Center. Next on our panel, we have Mr. Matt Bold. He is currently the architect for the SSA system for Lockheed Martin Space Systems Company. He's also been the program manager and chief systems engineer on a number of SSA programs, including the sales of commercial data products. His recent technical background is adaptive optics and atmospheric beam propagation. His graduate studies were in high energy particles at Arizona State University with an undergraduate degree from the University of Dayton in physics and mathematics. And lastly on our panel, we have Mr. Anthony Gleckler, and he has his Bachelor's of Science in Electrical Engineering and his PhD in Optical Sciences, both from the University of Arizona. Much of his early career was spent in adaptive optics for defense and astronomy. He was one of the principal designers of the adaptive optics system still in use on the Keck telescopes. In addition to astronomical imaging, he has been a key developer of much of the Navy's laser radar capability, particularly for underwater mine detection. And prior to starting GEOST, he was a chief engineer for electro-optics and payloads for the Spectrum Astro Space Systems, which is now part of Orbital Sciences. 10 years ago, he founded GEOST in Tucson, Arizona, where they specialize in a variety of SSA-related activities, notably networking and controlling arrays of automated telescopes for SSA data collection and analysis. As part of the Space View project, funded by DARPA, GEOST is taking advantage of the unused time on telescopes owned by amateur astronomers to collect professional quality data at very low cost, and then sells the data to the government. So I'd like to thank all our panel members for actually being here today, so let's thank them for coming. So with that, I'm going to turn the time over to each one of our panel members for about 5 minutes to talk about their views on involvement in space situation awareness. And then after that, we'll go ahead and we'll be able to answer some of the questions that you sent in. I'd like to remind everybody that up on the board is the actual number to text in your questions so that we can have those available to be able to answer throughout the forum. Go ahead.
Okay. Thanks, Colonel Gunn, for inviting me to be a part of this discussion. As you all heard in my bio, I manage a team who protects NASA's unmanned assets from collision with other on-orbit objects. Starting in 2005, supporting 3 missions, the service has grown to handle data for 65 spacecraft, including all LEO civil space missions and some international and commercial spacecraft. Reacting to potential on-orbit collision risk in an operational environment requires timely and accurate communication of data to ensure informed decision-making for safety of flight. It's imperative that operators have available to them the most accurate data possible from a reliable data source. In implementing our risk assessment process, we rely on the Joint Space Operations Center at Vandenberg as our data provider. We serve as a middleman between the JSPOC and the satellite operator, analyzing the risk of the predicted close approaches, and then working with the operator to mitigate threatening events. For the safety of everyone's assets, each owner-operator needs to have such a process for reacting to close approaches, not only for their own safety, but to prevent collisions that contaminate the space environment for others. For situations in which the 2 objects involved in the close approach are both operational missions, close communication between the 2 satellite operators is key to safely mitigating the risk of the close approach. To this end, we actively share ephemeris data with operators that have spacecraft close to NASA spacecraft and are in the process of developing a standard template that we can quickly use to send conjunction information to operators with whom we don't have an existing communication path. The template would contain information on planned mitigation strategies, such as maneuver times and durations, and would be packaged along with the conjunction data message, the CCSDS International Standard Format for CA data sharing, as produced by the JSPOC with the latest close approach prediction data. From a broader SSA perspective, the effects of space weather on the evolution of conjunctions is an important area of research, as there is currently no good method of directly predicting how the atmospheric drag will change and evolve when influenced by a solar flare. Space weather can also cause anomalies, so being aware of the space weather and considering all potential causes of the anomalies beyond hardware failure is important to understanding the big picture. Further, sharing these findings with other operators helps to understand patterns in the data, which could also help others. NASA is keenly aware of the need to share data and collaborate with other entities in striving to maintain flight safety. In developing our risk assessment process, we work closely with NASA Johnson, who does the conjunction assessment for human spaceflight. We also perform R&D to develop new tools and algorithms to improve our process, sometimes using the high-accuracy space object catalog data at JSPOC, which we access via our on-site personnel. We share results of our studies with the Air Force, who can sometimes apply the findings to their own processes in support of other operators. We actively participate in these types of collaborations with not only JSPOC, but also our international partners to ensure the safety of jointly held assets. Ensuring the safety of flight for all on-orbit assets, and thus also preserving the orbit environment for the future, takes the effort of every operator doing due diligence. NASA places high importance on SSA as an enabler of space asset protection and will continue to be involved in collaborating with the space community to improve space operations. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. Now, Dr. Romanowski.
Thank you, Colonel. And thank you again to the Maui Economic Development Authority and all the sponsors here. Let me take a little bit and step into why is the FAA dealing with space situational awareness and the like. And let me talk about that from the point of view of what is it we're trying to accomplish at the FAA right now. Congress gave us two parts of authority. The first was to protect the public safety and the safety of property from the effects of launch and reentry issues. And the second is to encourage, facilitate, and promote the growth of the commercial space industry. So in both parts of those authorities, we take very seriously, and the first way to encourage and promote that growth is to, in fact, assure the safety. But the reality is, over the last couple of years, that commercial space industry has, in fact, become a reality, and that we expect it to continue to grow. And let me illustrate that with a few numbers. Back in 2012, as a regulator, we licensed 5 commercial space launches. Last year, 2013, we licensed 18. And we've now passed that number in 2014. We'll see where we end up. But it's very easy to see us doubling the number in approaching into the 40 and 50 range next year, and then continuing to grow exponentially beyond that. So the reality is that industry is there. We need to be able to work and ensure that that industry continues to grow safely. And that brings a number of challenges that we have to face. Now, Brian Whedon this morning mentioned there's ongoing discussions about broader agency roles and all the like, but I'm going to focus my talk here on the current authorities that we have, and we've also heard a lot of discussion about the 2010 presidential space policy. There was an additional National Space Transportation Policy issued in 2013 that built upon the 2010 policy. And that in that policy, it said, FAA, you have exclusive authority for debris mitigation considerations relative to commercial space launches and reentries. So that's one motivation for what we're taking on. The second is a challenge recognizing the growth that we have and the impact of launches potentially on the national airspace system and effectively integrating that, our administrator gave us a challenge to safely integrate commercial space launch, space activities into the national airspace and to enable the benefits of those operations. So we're moving from a point from accommodation of launches where we may close large segments of airspace to one that more effectively integrates that the space operation into the national airspace. And we're doing that through some technology changes, automation changes, operational changes. The second part of that, though, really gets to our subject today, and it's deals with the responsibility for debris mitigation and collision avoidance for launches and re-entries. So we are doing things on the regulatory front in terms of putting in place a more robust framework for debris mitigation for the launches. But then we do have to also take into account the fact that launches and re-entries, collision avoidance is becoming much more complex with the new types of operations that are coming on board, both on the launch side and particularly on the re-entry side. So we are now have work underway actively to be able to demonstrate the capability to ingest space data, primarily from DoD, but and use that in assessing vehicle trajectories for collision avoidance. And also, as we move forward, because of the challenges we face, we are in fact looking to acquire a more robust capability beyond that demonstration. Okay, so we are in the process. We have work underway right now to develop what our candidate architectures would look like, what our requirements would be. But one of the things that's very important, and particularly as I look across the panel here and other folks that are here today, is we recognize there is a lot of existing capability which we can leverage as we do that, both from federal sources. I think the CARA lab provides an excellent model of what can be accomplished in the government to help assist our types of mission, as well as some of the commercial activities that we have underway. So we want to leverage fully what's out there and available as we do this. So why is that important? Let me talk a little bit about reentries. Today, we tend to have a fairly simple and straightforward model of what's happening on a reentry. You have a vehicle that is going to take a single trajectory that's defined, and it's going to make an oceanic splashdown in a hazard area that is fairly well defined. And there's a single deorbit opportunity that we would look to assess in the course of integrating that reentry, both the safe reentry and then its accommodation of the national airspace. And we can, in fact, because of the oceanic environment, have a fairly large-sized, oversized hazard area that would accommodate that reentry. But if we look at just what's coming at us in the next couple of years from some dramatic changes in mission need, such as some of the things that are going to come out with crew return from the space station, we look at potentially multiple landing sites from those operations, maybe a half a dozen different sites near populated areas, on-land landings, okay? Multiple potential mission trajectories that would occur or could occur, and not deciding until very late in the scenario in terms of which of those that would occur. And again, multiple deorbit opportunities for that landing. Without having improved tools at our disposal at the FAA that could not only from the point of view of lead to safety consequences for the general public in the U.S., but it could also wreak havoc on the national airspace system. Because, again, we can't afford to block basically we can't afford to block the western U.S. airspace to accommodate a single reentry. we have to have much more accurate tools. We have to have much improved capability. We have to have much improved airspace planning. So what these tools would allow us to do is complement work we're doing with the companies on shrinking hazard areas that are associated with the operation, but it'll allow us to put the automation enhancements in place and the tools in place to bring the collision avoidance considerations earlier into the planning process so that we can, in fact, examine those. Right now, we look at those towards the end of the process after we've already defined the airspace and the windows. Now, where they're just looking at what collision avoidance subset do you want to have a hold on, into making that a much more upfront part of the consideration process. And then plan that in with the entire airspace framework and ensure both efficiency and safety for the public. So that's what we're on about, and I look forward to the follow-on discussion.
All right, thank you. And now on to Mr. Paul Welch.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Colonel Gunn. And thank you to MEDB for the opportunity to present here at Maui and participate in this important discussion. What I'm going to cover today is a brief description of current and future commercial SSA capabilities by describing AGI's Commercial Space Operations Center, talking about sensors, number of objects, calibration and accuracy, and then also how that fits into what I see as the future of SSA market space, and also a few comments about near and far-term collaboration. ComSpoc is a commercial endeavor delivering data and analytical products on a commercial basis. The inspiration for ComSpoc comes in part from the call from Daz de Livero at last year's AMOS conference. He called for industry to apply innovation to address the dual challenges of rising SSA mission needs and a declining budget environment. Market-driven innovation is what drives the American economic engine, and that engine is the cornerstone of our national security. That force can be brought to bear for SSA. Another driver for the genesis of ComSpoc is the steady progression of Moore's Law, which makes commercial delivery of SSA data and solutions a viable endeavor. ComSpoc partners collect data from a geographically and phenomenologically diverse group of sensors: optical, RF, interferometric, radar, and space-based platforms, which is fused into the ComSpoc Processing Center, populating a rich store of space object information named Spacebook. ComSpoc is not just a sensor story, it's also about data fusion and processing with proven statistical estimation capabilities. The SSA software suite is the AGI commercial product which powers the ComSpoc Processing Center. This is the same product that the U.S. Air Force JMS program has purchased for use in the JSPOC. The Air Force has conducted rigorous numerical validations on the SSA software suite to ensure that it is bulletproof and suitable for use in the JSPOC. ComSpoc-generated data products are made available to subscribers via Spacebook, a web services-enabled data and analysis subscription service. Spacebook offerings include high-definition ephemeris, maneuver detection, safety of flight services, calibrations, launch and early orbit operations support, and patterns of life monitoring, just to name a few. Tiered pricing structure allows subscribers access to information for a focus group of objects or for all objects in the ComSpoc system. This particular Spacebook page seen here shows the importance of knowing about satellite maneuvers, in this case for the Galaxy 15 spacecraft. With regard to current and upcoming capabilities, here are the current sensor network locations. We have telescopes in North America, Spain, France, Italy, Australia, South Africa, and Chile. We have 3 long baseline RF interferometric sites in North America, UHF radars in Canada and Alaska, and a short baseline RF interferometric sensor site in Northern California. With regard to catalog size, we're currently tracking 1,000 objects. We're just a few weeks away from completing implementation of a radar control software upgrade, which will allow us to track up to 6,000 objects. Longer range plans include deployment of S-band radars, which will detect object sizes down to 2 centimeters. With regard to accuracy and calibrations, We calibrate our systems continually, interleaved with our regular collection activities against known truth objects such as navigation satellites, SLR, reference spheres, wide area augmentation system satellites, and owner satellites with high-precision GPS receivers. For all other objects, we're constantly checking our current estimates against our past predicts. With regard to accuracy, for active maneuvering geostationary satellites, we can get 40-meter ephemeris accuracy, 200-meter for objects that are debris objects in GEO, and at LEO we can get 15-meter ephemeris accuracy. What's the future of the SSA market space, and how does CommSpot fit into it? CommSpot's a system that can add complementary value to all operator and SSA systems. An analogy that works well is that CommSpot is to commercial SSA as Digital Globe and Skybox are to commercial remote sensing. These companies operate in a market area that was once the exclusive domain of government systems, but the market is now economically served by commercial companies delivering high-value results. The advent of CommSpot marks a similar evolution of the SSA market, where commercial providers can also deliver cost-effective results. There are many sources and types of sensor observation data. The CommSpot Processing Center has the technical capability to process all of it. If you have sensors or sensor data that you feel can add value, we're interested to hear more about it, and the marketplace for SSA data is open. SSA needs are growing, and we believe that commercial SSA systems will deliver value to all parties. Satellite operators will be able to increase their orbit determined accuracy and lower costs. Satellite manufacturers will be better able to track and protect their payloads in the months-long electric orbit raising transfer orbit phases. New satellite operators will require less infrastructure and expertise to fly a satellite, and will be able to do so in a more responsible manner, which is to the benefit of all. SSA watch centers can benefit from the additional knowledge provided by commercial SSA systems. New watch centers can start from a higher plateau on day one. And the emergence of commercial SSA systems will allow the JSPOC to focus on their primary mission. Below the CommSpot logo here is an animation showing a few days in the life of the geostationary arc above the continental United States. I guess known here as the mainland, right? Green dots are active satellites, red are debris. It's an interesting visual perspective on what happens when objects in the geo arc are no longer controlled for inclination. Regarding collaborations in the near and far term, we view everyone in the SSA marketplace as a prospective customer, naturally, right? We're a commercial operation. And it's also our experience that most SSA stakeholders, operators, watch centers, anyone else who has an interest in space, also has some data that they generate or have available to them that can be used to contribute to improve SSA. Combining data sets produces better results if the processing is done correctly. As many have said previously already at this conference, getting all the right data in the right place is the way to go. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Colonel Gunn. I have a few slides too. So first, thanks to the MEDB, the Space Foundation, and Secure World Foundation for the invitation to be here. It's great to be back at this important conference. I'm going to talk a little bit about current capabilities of the Space Data Association and its processing system, the Space Data Center, and also raise a few questions that I think we ought to be thinking about from a policy perspective, some emerging challenges, which are, of course, also opportunities. SDA was started back in 2010, roughly, by the folks you see on this slide. AGI is the technology advisor and operates the information system, which allows SDA to provide verified and normalized data and turn that data coming from spacetrack.org or owner-operator data sources into a fully automated operations center that has 24/7 staffing behind it. It's open to all satellite operators in all orbits, operates on a not-for-profit basis, so it's commercial but not-for-profit. and as I'll talk about in a moment, it has some unique features in the agreements that govern its operation that are important in doing this set of getting all the data in one place. And recently, SDA became a SSA data sharing program participant. This took a while, and it was a result of evolving policy in the US DoD. Basically, 3 missions. Increasing safety of flight through automated conjunction assessment. That also helps us preserve the space environment. Dealing with the growing problem of radio frequency interference, which is something that I think should be part of SSA, is the electromagnetic environment, but we don't often talk about it here. And also maintaining up-to-date contact information, as well as sharing best practices and promoting those globally. Current participants include 24 operators, approximately 400 satellites, and includes military, government, civil, and commercial operators, as you see here. Those operators all agree to provide data. Specifically, they provide their measured ephemerides and, importantly, their planned maneuvers. So the SDA, as far as I know, is the only source, the only database that has planned maneuvers as well as current state vectors that have been measured by the owner-operator. So it's also a predictive system that can deconflict planned maneuvers against orbital debris or other active objects if we have the data. Also points of contact, and in the near future, communications payload data for dealing with things like electromagnetic interference so that the interference source can be geolocated. As General Hyten said this morning, it is all about the data, and that's what SDA is about, is providing a means for operators to safely share data and receive analytic products in a way that allows them to do so without worrying about their proprietary information. A lot of this information is highly proprietary, and yet folks are motivated to share. Why is that? Well, of course, they value the analytic products. They want the safety of the system. But really, it comes down to the agreement that governs SDA's operation. And those agreements were worked out took about a year, and a number of law firms and governments involved. But the agreements are enforceable. So unlike the typical non-disclosure agreements that you might see with companies that are kind of a slap on the wrist if you violate them, the agreements really are enforceable and are backed by financial penalties. A Fortune 10 company used to be an SDA member. It's a 2-letter company starting with G and ending with E. For them to join SDA, the agreement had to go to their board of directors and be voted on at that level because the liability for them would have, was in excess of billions of dollars potentially. And they did sign, and we did not negotiate the agreement. They signed it as written. There are technical measures to protect data, including data in transit and data at rest. So some of the same problems that we've heard about on the cyber side, all that stuff is there. Why is it important to share? Operators who are flying satellites generally have the best data on their satellites, and they're the only people that have data on their maneuvers. However, they don't use the same terminology, and the data products, despite international standardization efforts, are disparate. What does SDA do? Thanks to our friends at AGI, we're able to take in all those different formats, data sets, and normalize them into a common database. And also, it's like a universal translator. Data can come in multiple formats, and data can go out in multiple formats, including the JSPOC formats that folks were talking about earlier. SDA also conducts, through AGI, initial verification and validation of data so that there's a sanity check to make sure that garbage isn't coming in, and OD verifications happen all the time. That normalized data allows practical use. So that's what SDA is doing. What's the future look like? Well, sitting here for the 3rd year on the policy forum, we're still talking about data sharing, but what's encouraging is that we're actually starting to talk a little bit about the how, not the if. I still think it's going pretty slowly, but I understand that the governments move slowly. On the commercial side, we're seeing a lot of changes. We see the emergence of ComSpock and other commercial data providers who are able to provide sensor data that we might be able to process or overlay with our other system. Now we can work with the JSPOC. I'm happy to report, for those who've seen me up here before in other years, it was clear that DoD's policy on working with commercial operators and multi-party operators like SDA was evolving slowly, and there was some friction as we all got started and figured out what we're trying to do. I'm happy to report that's entirely behind us. We work very closely now with General Raymond and his team at the JSPOC, and with General Thompson and his team at US Stratcom, and that's a really good thing. So it took us a while, but we're all pulling in the same direction now. What do I worry about? I worry about small satellites, electric propulsion. A number of operators are joining our world, and the satellites that they bring, although at the instant that they're launched might be important to them, they don't cost a lot of money, maybe. That low cost may drive them to have a lower level of concern about the environment or the effects of those satellites. We don't have rules of the road yet. I heard this morning, I think it was Victoria or Brian, one of them, I heard from both of them, say that Secure World is talking about putting out a publication about sort of best practices, guides for the uninitiated space operator. I think it's a wonderful idea and will help jumpstart that rules of the road discussion that's so important because, again, as the barriers to entry to fall to get to space, we're going to just have a problem there. Well, what are we going to do when we have satellites that are in LEO one moment and then are using propulsion, transiting orbital planes? We're going to need maneuver detection, and the current set of sensors that we have that are not really up to doing that 24/7 or pretty much continuous monitoring. So that's hard, and folks like AGI are working on that. And then the other problem from a commercial SATCOM perspective is EMI. As the space environment gets more crowded, folks want to use more spectrum, and we're starting to have real problems there with unintentional and occasionally intentional interference. And we are just developing the tools that will allow us to find and correct those errors. So those are some of the things we're worried about. Thanks very much for your attention. I look forward to your questions.
Thanks for having us here today. Thank you, Colonel Gunn. Again, my name's Matt Bold. I'm from Lockheed Martin Space Systems Company. And I'm from the Palo Alto laboratories, Star Labs. And our focus has been within Space Systems Company developing technologies for sensors, for sensing purposes, for space situational awareness, for how to aggregate and distribute and pull knowledge from all the data that we're collecting, and how to apply that to managing the space domain. Space Systems Company, Colonel Gunn asked a question earlier before we started this about what impact do we see the work that we're doing having on the economic environment of space. And, as I said, we're from Space Systems Company. We have an interest in having a secure and safe operating environment for our customers. If space were to become unusable, our Space Systems Company business could go away. So we don't just have we're not just picking up projects and looking to develop a marketplace in space situational awareness. We see a national security interest. We see an interest for our customers. So we take this very seriously and have been making significant investments in this area for a while. I think everybody has seen the plots of the number of space objects growing with time. I think when Space Fence turns on, that number no one should be surprised, is going to leap. And as you mentioned, the lower barriers to of entry into the space market, lower costs, microsats, picosats. I don't know that that curve is really representative of what we're going to see in the future. It may be very conservative. It's almost a disposable space environment when I can just buy things and have them work for a year or two and move on to the next project, next payload. So, you know, we've always been in a mode of catch-up in SSA, and I think as that problem accelerates, we need to accelerate our efforts. How industry plays here, first off, is we need a strong partnership with the laboratories and transitioning the technologies from the labs to operation. We have been working on roadmaps for what the space situational awareness architecture looks like, envisioning that future. And, you know, one thing I think we need to do better in industry is work with the public sector, with the labs, with Stratcom and other partners to get roadmaps that align, share where our investments are going, and make sure that we're all on the same path. The other thing that I think we need to do in industry more is tapping into the other solutions that exist out there. As the General said this morning, you know, we have a big data problem here. We're not the only ones that face a big data problem. It seems like something that's going to be hard to overcome. But, you know, this is the same data problem that's been encountered in the financial world and the medical world and all these other industries. And we have investments in these other marketplaces, and we need to go out and tap into those resources and bring them back to share into this problem. I think another area where industry can help play here is in international data sharing. As the General noted, I think it's apparent to all of us, you know, this is a global problem. It's global in accessing to data. It's global in sharing that data with the rest of the operator communities, commercial world, other governments. You know, we are an international company, so we have an infrastructure. We sell products in other countries, and we can tap into that infrastructure and help with developing data sharing potential. So this is a policy forum, and, you know, it's a little hard for industry here. We don't make policy, right? We follow policy. So my perspective on this is that you know, the policy is not clear right now. This is a very, very important discussion to have because the policies are not clear. And for a company, for us to act responsibly, when there's ambiguity, we have to take the conservative road. So we do. We will never violate export control. We will never violate data issues. We protect that. We protect our customers. So by having ambiguity in policy, our hands are tied somewhat. But I think that this discussion is happening, and I think we're making advancements. We're very excited by seeing a lot of the data sharing agreements that have been signed between governments. We just need to continue working out what the mechanics are of that at these other levels. But I think that we are beginning to accelerate SSA, and I think we can have a good partnership between industry, between military, civil, and international partners.
Okay, I'm going to turn the panel around a little bit and ask you guys a question. I got 40 terabytes of SSA data. Who wants to buy it? Okay, show of hands. Okay, that's what I was afraid of. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the market associated with trying to sell data. Okay. First of all, there are probably some of you who may have actually been somewhat interested in that offer. But there's probably questions you had, what am I getting in that 40 terabytes, right? So one of the issues with SSA data is it's not really productized at this point. When you go to the store to buy milk, you can get skim 1%, 2% whole or cream. You know what you're getting. You really don't need to know which vendor it is because they're all producing pretty much the same kind of milk. We're not at that spot yet with SSA data. There's a lot of things going on in the community, and those things have not been productized. So that's an issue for marketing this and selling data. Another is, what price would you guys pay for that 40 terabytes? Is it a penny an observation? Is it $1 an observation? Is it $1,000 an observation? What's a reasonable price? If you went to buy milk and it was 10 cents a gallon, you'd probably look at it a little cross-eyed there. But if it was $50 a gallon, you go somebody's wacko. There's not really established prices for this stuff yet either. And so we have to try to work through those issues and come up with not only what it takes to collect and process and generate that data, but also what it's worth to various customers. And different customers have different needs. Another one is data quality. What quality of data would I be providing on that hard drive? And so, this is a big question. And, I would say that the majority of our customers who talk to us the first time are very similar. Instead of saying, here's the milk, they go, don't worry, we'll homogenize it. Just give us the raw product. And by the way, what breed of cow was that and what did you feed it that day? That's the kind of the nature of trust that doesn't really exist yet for commercial producers. We're still trying to work through how we provide the quality and precision and assurance that the end users can go away with happily and feel that they can make decisions on their very expensive, important assets about. Another one is how do you order your product? How do you task a provider to give you what you need? And so we need to work through that process where we can provide you a fairly simple way, like Amazon or something along those lines, where you can order up what you need without having intimate knowledge of what the sensors are necessarily. You don't need to be optical experts if you want a telescope observation. Just tell us what you want, and we have to be able to provide that to you in a way that you guys can use. As you talk about an emerging market, there's a lot of business practices out there, and what you tend to see are two types of customers. One are the people that want to take advantage of an emerging market and develop new things for it, and they tend to be very happy and on your side, and they typically don't have a clue as to what they want because they're still trying to figure it out themselves. So you have this ambiguous group of people that are on your side. Then you have more established and operational people that already have ongoing operations, and they are doing things in a certain way, and they really don't want to be disturbed from that process. And in many cases, they're punished for mistakes rather than rewarded for making things better. And so you tend to have a resistant group out there that are really the ones that are doing the work on a day-to-day basis and really need the data production, but they are very highly cross-referenced. There's an excellent book called Crossing the Chasm. It's for the transition of technology. It's by Jeffrey Moore. It's a classic for venture capital development. And basically it talks about the fact that when an emerging market starts, you tend to have people that are on your side, in this case Colonel Gunn and Colonel Blake before him, to help develop things in the first place. But now when you try to get to the operational community, they're much different. If I went to your company and said, hey, I've got new server software, and I want you to put it on your server, and it's, you're never going to have to increase your hard drives, you'll never get a virus, it's lovely stuff, they'd tell me to get out, okay? Or they'd say, okay, that's very interesting, but where else have you put it? Okay, because your IT people at your companies, they're not going to want to put your company at risk for new software. They're going to be calling around to all the other people that you've put this on and asking them lots of questions. And so you get this highly cross-referenced community that tends to be very resistant to new technology because you have to kind of hit it all at once. And so, as I said, Crossing the Chasm is an excellent book, and it's an easy read and a great one for technical people to read a little on the business side, by the way, that talks about how you make a beachhead into that market and work with people and spread out laterally in that market and start working with them. But it's not an easy process. There's a lot of resistance there. Okay, another question. Raise your hands if you have purchased commercial SSA data in the last year. Raise them high. I need some hands here. I've done one. I see. Well, raise your hand up high. I want to see. Okay, so we got a couple here. Now, did any of you spend more than 100,000? Okay, purchasing. Okay, so we got 2. Did you spend more? Actually, purchasing data. Did you spend more than $1 million?
More than what?
$1 million.
No, but it depends. I paid for development as well. So.
No, not the development. Just
Yeah.
purchasing data right now.
No.
Okay, so we've now got sort of if this represents a 10% or a third of the market that's out there, you can see there's not a whole lot of market for commercial data just yet. So what does that mean for a business that's trying to get into this area? Well, it's very hard for me to go to a bank. It's very hard for me to go to a venture capitalist without a market out there that's going to take advantage of this. And so this is something that you have to worry about in terms of a product, that you have a market out there that you can convince people to invest in to go buy things. Now, we can make some very nice cases that there's a lot of data that needs to be collected. I think this community is not going to argue a whole lot with that. And there's a couple little interesting things, like you could throw a dedicated telescope on every satellite in GEO and just watch it full time. And that's basically the cost of a high-end security system for a $100 million building, okay? It's not that much money. And then the other thing is we get more objects out there. There's an interesting little tidbit there. As we go to try to collect more on, say, 500,000 objects rather than just the 20,000, we're going to drive the satellite operators crazy with all the COLA events. Okay, they already get too many. They don't pay attention to most of them. They get a list every week, and a lot of these guys make one COLA maneuver a year. Okay, so if you start tracking 500,000 objects, and now you're producing 25 times as many COLA events, they're not going to be able to deal with that. So what's going to happen is you're going to have to increase the cadence at which you're taking this data in order to shrink the error volume down on your location of these guys. And so if you go through all the numbers, it comes down to you have to start looking at data, looking at objects at least once a day in LEO in order to get the error volumes down low enough that they're not having all these potential COLA events on everything under the sun. So there's great cases for the fact that there's lots of data to be collected and utility for that data. But until we start getting that market going, it's a very difficult prospect to get investment in that, at least from a venture or banking or things along those lines. Ideally, you get the visionaries. Again, DARPA is a great asset in this case for those kind of things, and I would definitely want to thank them for getting us started in that market and generating the seeds of that market and trying to jumpstart that. But those are some of the difficulties that lay ahead for people in this area. Thank you.
Thank you much for your comments. And I'd like to remind everybody to text your questions to the number that's up on the board there. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to start off and ask a question about promoting standards. And give me 1 second here. So this was really kind of focused towards Mr. Duva for SDA, but I think it kind of applies to the FAA as well. And the question really is, shouldn't the SDA promote a standard for platforms that are highly maneuverable to self-report position data via active RF beacon? There's kind of a follow-on question to that has to do with the FAA specifically about this issue, and let me go ahead and read this. There's been a considerable dialogue inside the Beltway concerning launch through disposal regulation of commercial space systems. FAA licenses launch and reentry. NOAA licenses commercial remote sensing systems. The FCC licenses spectrum, but nobody regulates on-orbit ops. If the FAA gets the job, how would you do it? And I really think that I'd like to hear both from SDA kind of on both of those topics because they're somewhat related. And then we'll see where we go from there and see if there's some more input on those lines. So why don't we start with Mr. Dova.
Okay. Those are good policy questions. Let me start with the standards piece. In order to participate in SDA up till now, and I think going forward it's likely to remain unchanged, a satellite operator has to commit to providing its location information and planned maneuvers. So implicit in that is that the satellite operator knows where it is, that they have to at least be that good. So the current participants all are doing ranging or have other mechanisms to determine the locations, in their orbits of the satellites. It's possible, for communication satellite providers, there are beacons, but that's just one technical measure. So I don't think we would set a specific requirement about the how, but we would probably continue to suggest that it makes sense if you're flying a maneuverable object that you know where it is, and at least if you're going to participate in SDA and you plan to make a maneuver, that you pre-notify that so that the system can use the best data available to deconflict that maneuver with potentially with other objects or debris, whether they're controlled or not. As to the regulatory question you asked, it's interesting because I believe I heard your question as listing a lot of U.S. regulatory agencies in FAA, FCC, et cetera. I didn't actually hear you say, maybe you did, I missed it. The fact is this is an international problem. The U.S. does not regulate space. The U.S. is just but one nation that authorizes actions in space. And so what we have is we have a lot of times where you have forum selection for satellite operators, where they will choose the regulatory environment that best suits them, whether it be for launch vehicle services or for on-orbit operations, which, at least under the treaty framework, are still subject to continuing supervision and control of the launching state. So the risk you run in trying to give one mission to everybody or to try to unify that is you can have a race to the bottom. So my recommendation to U.S. policymakers and U.S. regulatory authorities is that the way to influence that debate is to continue to try to lead, as they have done and are doing, by balancing the need for flexibility and innovation with the need to carry out their government responsibilities for supervision and control. It's a very, very hard balance, but I think the U.S. has done a pretty good job in doing that.
I'll follow on the on-orbit part of this. I think one of the things that we have to recognize is the U.S. does in fact have international obligations for the conduct of the activities of its U.S. nationals in space, okay? And one of the things that we are looking at is there are certain types of emerging commercial operations that are beyond what had been anticipated before. We have well-known satellite operations, for example. That's not what we're talking about, but we have things that are, think about, some of the services that are being provided to NASA commercially. Now we're doing cargo to the space station. We're going to be doing crew commercially to the space station. Those are, again, fairly anticipated type of operations, but we're also seeing some other things that are on-orbit satellite transportation services and satellite services and pulling and tugging satellites to new orbits and moving them around. That's something new and different that's being envisioned. We're also seeing things like commercial space stations and possibly beyond orbit commercial operations. Those sorts of things, I think we are getting into a little bit of a regulatory and policy area where there are gaps that have been identified and exist. Our concern at the FAA really is those that involve transportation. And we see, I think, the need to move out ahead and ensure the policy aspects are and are appropriately handled so that these issues don't become a barrier to the growth of the U.S. commercial space industry, because we do see, in fact, as the U.S. is looking forward to making sure it can meet its international obligations, the gap has been readily identified and one that we have to, in fact, work to close. So we've highlighted this in a number of forums that we do, in fact, think we have to take some actions as a U.S. entity to ensure that those operations can work successfully, they can be safe, and that there are no artificial barriers put in place of being allowed those operations to continue or grow, for that matter.
Okay, thank you. So there's actually a question that I'm going to combine as well in here. And one of them was, what is the biggest challenge of SSA in the next 5 years for SSA sharing? But I want to spice that up a little bit because somebody actually sent in a question and said, in terms of how does, for example, a postdoc get SSA data in order to enable the work that they want to do for their postdoc? So I actually would like Ms. Newman to start with that, since NASA has a big investment in education, and see what your thoughts are along those lines in terms of getting data to somebody that's involved in education, but then kind of following on to what you think the biggest impediments are for sharing SSA data in the next 5 years, and maybe we'll take that on to somebody else as well.
Okay. So NASA does reach out to the education community and tries to share things as much as possible. I'm not sure exactly all the pieces of data that are currently shared, but a lot of spacecraft data is available to the public and can be used. So both we reach out to the community, but also we encourage people from the community to come to us and ask us for the things they need, and then we try to find solutions for how to do that. But that's NASA specific. That doesn't apply to everyone. Certainly some commercial operators have data that's proprietary that they wouldn't share and so forth. So maybe it's only applicable to the science spacecraft that NASA has. Biggest impediments to data sharing. Certainly having standard formats and reliable accuracy where you understand that everyone's data is something that you can rely on, knowing that the other operator doesn't have a bias in their data that maybe they're not even aware of, being able to trust the data that you're getting and share it, and everyone to be able to use it to a common end. I don't know, I'll pass it to someone else.
You can pass it if you want to. I threw a hard one at you. Anybody else want to jump on that?
Okay. With regard to the providing SSA data for education, at AGI, we're well known for software, SDK and ODTK. We have an educational alliance program as part of our standard business practices where we make that data available for educational purposes, at the college level, high school, even grade school level, and graduate level. So, the data stores that are available in Spacebook, we envision a similar concept where we'll be making that data available for purely educational purposes in order to promote, promote STEM throughout our industry. As for the other part of the problem, the 5-year biggest obstacles for sharing. Certainly understanding the reference frames, formats, and timing systems that data is in is something that has to be attended to. As Andrew mentioned, the universal translators that are in the SDC, I mean, we've seen a lot of operators, a lot of different disparate data sets. That's once the data formats and frames are understood, it's an easy thing to translate them, but that first part is pretty much what's toughest to crack. Standardization can address that in the long run, but in the short run, understanding what those are, and part of that understanding comes from validation against external independent data sources to really forensically nail all that down. So not to sound like, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, but ComSpock data sets can lend that independent data to be a part of that validation, as can data from any other sources. If there's increased sharing through SSA sharing agreements of SSN data, that can also be utilized as well. So, and any other data sources that are out there. So understanding how all the data is put together and how it's organized in order to merge it, those are the technical challenges.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, let me go a different direction from the technical challenges. I think the biggest challenge to data sharing flows from the fact that, for SSA, that the data are used both for, let's call them non-national security and national security purposes by space actors. And so the problem is cultural. There are folks, actually many of you in this room, who would like to share data, but are concerned about whether policy permits it. I think General Hyten has put that to bed, at least with regard to the U.S., clarified that, but do worry legitimately about what the implications of that data sharing might be and whether you're authorized to do it or what the processes are. And a lot of that is just baked in cultural stuff that will probably take 5 years to work out. I hope it doesn't, but I think it probably will.
I think data's coming. I think we'll work through these issues. I think we'll work through standardization of the data. And where my concern lies is in 5 years is be careful what you ask for. What are you going to do with all that data? How are you going to get knowledge out of it that you can act on, that everyone can act on? And more importantly, as it's flooding in, how does it go the other direction where you task or ask for the data that you really need? And that's a challenge.
The way I like to think of this market really is it's very much like the existing recon market, where you have all this data available and all this imagery. Now just take that and turn it upside down and look up. Okay, so now you've got inexpensive assets, you've got medium assets, you've got large assets, and how do you task all of these? How do you order things, through this? What kind of data products are you going to get? And so if you think about the recon market, I mean, there's literally been billions spent in a lot of the tasking. Yeah, I'm getting some thumbs up for higher numbers. In terms of just the tasking and the processing and the data products and all of that. And we're going to be starting, if we really want to understand everything that's going on in space and get a lot of data at high rates and be able to understand it and let, ideally the machines and algorithms do a lot of the processing so that the people are just getting items that they need to act on. There's a lot of infrastructure associated with that I would say is very similar to what's gone on in the recon industry.
So should be an easy one, though. What is the role of insurance agencies in your industry, specifically in your organization's practices and stuff? Is insurance driving some of the areas that you're moving forward in SSA? And I'll just leave this open for anybody who wants to jump on that one.
I'll jump on it, since I work with a lot of satellite operators, commercial ones. It's not large. Insurance providers, if you look at the cost for on-orbit, third-party liability insurance, it's very, very low. Some companies have it, some don't even bother getting it. And we don't see yet a premium placed on, let's say, exceptionally responsible space operations. Insurers are not providing discounts based on a review of operational activities of satellite operators. That might change if there were to be another collision.
Yeah, I think the other thing that drives some space insurance to be unique is that, insurers are all about buying and selling risk and quantifying that very precisely. And in the space market, the quantitative data is not there to put a price on that risk, right? So General Hyten this morning said we've got 20,000 objects, and when we have 250,000, it'll be a whole different story. So, more data which would allow insurers to more precisely quantify the risk, I think will possibly drive a change in their role. And I guess the other thing is it's very competitive right now. So, they're driving premiums down very low. And again, in the absence of that data, there's nothing to stop them from doing that.
And they don't have the experience of having a covered loss, right? So it's at least from if you're talking about a conjunction, right? Insurance claims tend to be related to launch failures or on-orbit failures that are due to equipment or other anomalies that are never resolved, generally from manufacturing. So that's where even if they can't quantify the risk, they're more able to quantify it against, for example, a satellite product line or a particular run of subsystem assemblies or the like. So that's where the market tends to be. But as Paul said, it's very competitive now. It's come, in the last 10 years, the premiums have come way down.
Now, one thing to think about is the insurance companies might be interested because they don't cover acts of war typically with a lot of their insurance policies. So if they can prove that it was an act of an outside agent, if they can do the attribution, then they don't have to pay. So that might be something that the insurance companies may want to think about.
Okay. How about this one? How much do export controls affect commercial entities' operations and affect efforts to cooperate internationally?
I'll go ahead and take a first shot at this one because we've been looking internationally for a lot of our satellite operations and things along those lines, and it's a big deal. We have to worry about export control and ITAR and everything we do, and it does provide a damper, and it's something we have to work out with each country individually oftentimes. And so it definitely slows things down. I think it's, in the U.S.'s best interest to make sure that they're protecting themselves. But it's not an easy process, and a lot of times, particularly for a small company, to try and go through that the first time, it's very difficult. There's not really, at least in local areas, maybe in the D.C. area, there are more people that have expertise in this, but when you're out away from D.C., a lot of times you have problems finding people that can really even help you answer the questions.
My perspective is that I agree that these are challenges. There's a burden there, but export control is a legal process. Legal processes don't move very quickly. SSA does. The need to have data in a timely way, the need to task assets in a timely way is essential, and the two right now are mutually exclusive. So.
Just a quick comment. It can cast a long shadow, on transactions overseas, right? There is some extra steps necessary, but applying for export licenses, there's a process you can go through it. I mean, the main thing it highlights to the international entity that's there, and that the U.S. The biggest thing is the U.S. could decide at some point in the future that they could change it, and international entities look at that and say, well, okay, for right now you've got a license, but what about in 5 years, So it's that kind of long shadow that puts a damper on international business.
Okay. This is an interesting question. This could be taken multiple different ways. So what is the future of SDA when JMS's capabilities to ingest commercial data come online? I could see that as the opposite of Maybe JMS really doesn't have that responsibility, and maybe it's transferred to somebody else. So I'd be curious to see what your thoughts are on that from multiple people.
Yeah, let me take it first since it's the organization I'm here representing. You know, I know some in this room would disagree with this statement, but I will say that my personal belief is that a lot of the impetus for change within DoD came from the fact that some operators decided to do a limited CA mission through SDA rather than relying on what was available at the time from the U.S. government in terms of CA support. That's not to say, as I said in my remarks, that's not today's situation. Things have evolved tremendously, and the path is still very positive. I think there will always be a value in having operators invested, if you will, in tool sets, which is what the SDC really is for operators, that they can control and use for their own purposes. So the SDA might evolve in its CA mission to be a facilitator of providing data and analytic products to the JSPOC, other space operations centers, other third parties, right? The universal translator point that I made is something that right now hasn't been solved, and maybe it sounds like JMS will solve it, or the non-traditional data preprocessor might solve it a little sooner. But there may come a time in the future when the CA runs don't have to be performed by SDA. The reason they were and are is because those government processes, the alternatives, are still not very transparent. So that's an evolution that's happening. I mentioned DMI, RFI mitigation, and that's something that, as far as I know, is not really even on the radar too much of JFCC Space and JSPOC. It's EMI is listed as one of the advanced services that's provided under the SSA data sharing program, but if you scratch that and try to pull a thread on that, there's really nothing there today. So that's something that at least many of the operators within SDA will still look to SDA to support is geolocalization support and RFI deconfliction. So I suspect there will also be a value in, again, the legal framework we have for securely sharing data in a way that provides redress. For example, the U.S. Has said that they've asserted sovereign immunity with respect to SSA data sharing. If you have a problem with what the U.S. is giving you and you're a commercial operator, you can't sue them. You won't be able to claim anything. The U.S. has said from the beginning they will not be sued, they will not be paid. The services are not available in times when the DoD decides they're not. Organizations like SDA and other commercial operators exist solely to serve those needs. They can be sued. They will be available if it's possible, because that's their sole mission. So it'll be interesting to see how it evolves. I do think that the emphasis on CA will decrease as other capabilities come online. For example, through JMS and other providers, like for example, like things like ComSpoc and other processing engines.
Go ahead.
I think one of the things we think about is one-size-fits-all solutions, right? And I think one of the things we have to be careful about thinking about is one-size-fits-all solutions. I come from the aviation world, okay, and there are, as we're talking here, I was thinking of what are some of the analogs. I think, and as much as I argue that what we're talking about with space traffic management has very little bearing to air traffic management, I'm going to use air traffic management as an analog. And I think what you find there is a nest of complementary capabilities, and I think that's what we may eventually see evolving here in this world, where and the way I look at, okay, so the FAA has a national infrastructure for air traffic control, and there's a national capability that exists. There are high altitude en route capabilities that exist. There are local around major metro areas, what they call terminal capabilities that exist. And then there's each airport has its own tower, right? So that's the part that people see, but what they also don't see is every airline or there are coalitions as well that exist that have their own op centers that deal with what is the flow of aircraft and movement around the country. So I think what we're seeing, what we would see by analogy is, okay, DoD still has that big, strong, broad net that has the national security aspects to this, but at the same time, we've got CARA that deals with NASA's assets. We have other federal entities that deal with their assets or their areas of responsibility. At the same time, the industry is dealing with its part of the asset realm in terms of whether it's a single company or a coalition that exists. But what it does do is it leads to much more informed decision-making amongst everybody. And you really get into, if you look at the flow of aircraft around the country every day, that's a collaborative exercise between the air traffic control, looking at national strategies for movement, but also looking at local, and the operators in terms of what their priorities are and their needs and their ability. So it's really working together to try to get to the best answers and solutions. I would hazard a guess as this capability matures with different players having comparable, compatible capabilities, you'd see a much more integrated framework rather than a one-size-fits-all application.
Anyone else? Okay. Next question I have is, do commercial data vendors consider spacetrack.org as an impediment to commercial growth?
I certainly don't. You know, we're taking everything we can that's out there and available and taking full advantage of it. And I think, as I mentioned before, I think there's a huge area where more data can be fed into this area. I think it's mostly the people that want to ingest it and go to these higher data rates and higher data volumes and be able to process all of that is really the key to developing this market. I don't think the people that are in there now are impediments in any way. As a matter of fact, I think they're kind of the structure that's forming this market.
Yeah, I think they're a reflection of what is already there, of the infrastructure, the data infrastructure that's already there. And as you said, you know, whether there's more data is needed, more services are needed on top of that. I don't think it's a competitive. I think it's laying the groundwork for what is to come.
Yeah, I would say not an impediment at all. It's a foundational data set that's been around for quite a while, and you know, we see adding data and adding more finished products and services, you know, is what's layered on top of that, and that's really the foundation of our business approach.
Okay. So there was a comment earlier, I believe, from Mr. Bold, where you had stated that you don't create policy, but rather follow it. And am I getting that wrong? I can't remember who said that. Was that you? Okay. You're on the hot spot. So earlier today, we heard General Hyten note that current policy is positive. So what are the biggest obstacles you face that inhibit your role in SSA efforts?
Well, it's the cultural interpretation of those policies, and the general, it may be clear that there are no policy impediments, but that has to flow down through our customers and through our legal and, you know, all the infrastructure that govern how we operate. So the cultural impressions that are put on that are what we really end up having to follow.
Okay. Anybody else want to touch on that from your perspective?
Yeah, I would second that, and the process over the last 4 years that SDA has gone through with AGI in support of their activities, we've experienced that and worked through a lot of that, and have got a good, solid working relationship. At this point, it has taken a lot of time. There's a lot of people throughout the organization, top to bottom, that maybe don't immediately get the memo and have their own views of what should or shouldn't be done. Processes tend to be deeply rooted in the status quo. The system's not the most oriented towards economic decision-making either, right? So there tends to be a lot of friction in the system that way.
Okay.
But the policy is clear. It's the implementation, right?
All right. I have a question here I'm going to modify a little bit, and what I'd like to know is starting with NASA and then kind of going down, talking with each organization, is how do we see, for example, like CARA, ComSpoc, SDA, how do you envision everybody operating together in the future? And this, you touched on this a little bit earlier when we talked about the JMS question. So I'd really like to see what you have in terms of, is there a possibility for operating together? And if there is, what does that really mean in the future? So go ahead.
So I guess there's lots of different ways that this could go. Having one organization be kind of a centralized processing place where everyone sends their data and the screenings get performed, and then that organization puts them out. That's certainly one way. Certainly collaboration and sharing of the data is very important. So right now we support some international entities, some commercial entities, so we don't make a distinction between we only support NASA and that's it. So working with different customers to bring in their data and process it and figure out how to share it back to them, given that it's data from the JSPOC and we have to have the right sharing authorities and so forth. That's sometimes a challenge, but I don't see, I guess, an issue in trying to open this up to multiple entities trying to interact with each other to do this kind of thing, as long as the data is accurate and available and everyone's willing to collaborate with each other.
Yeah, I kind of went on at length, I think, before about how this could work, but let me add one other bit to it in terms of how this goes forward. This is going to be evolutionary as we build, as SDA and ComSpoc, we gain capability, JMS comes online. I think that what Lori just said, the commitment to work together is the critical thing. And as we each continue to gain capabilities, as we do that, we're going to lead to better solutions, we're going to lead to better reliability, and we're going, and the relationships will evolve as we go forward to the point that it's all, the intent is always to drive to more effective solutions. And if we do that, when we to start dealing with the 250,000 item catalog, that's going to be necessary to make sure we're making the right decisions and not paralyzing ourselves. So I think it's just keep working it and let it evolve.
Yeah, I would say I would completely agree with what's been said already, and Mike really answered it previously with your heterogeneous organizations that make up the overall air traffic management system. CARA right now participates with the Space Data Center, sending their information in, to protect their active satellites against other active satellites. That cooperation goes on right now. Course of action determination of any individual operator for safety of flight purposes is ultimately their responsibility. So, CARA does that for NASA payloads. There can be other organizations that do it for commercial operations. CommSpot's available to provide those services in, it's an a la carte menu really, bringing a lot of extra non-cooperative data and independent data to the analysis. And then, data fusion's another buzzword, lots of people talk about it, but appropriate to whatever the particular mission at hand is, there's these different organizations that will do that activity, right? So, there's the JSPOC will continue with its military mission as other, if there's other entities that, governmental, non-military, who emerge to do space traffic management. Yeah, I don't know if that's a sensitive topic or not, but I mean, I'll say it since I don't, I don't work for the government. But if that takes place, that's a different set of data and a different set of missions that would have to be addressed in a unique way. So that's really all the different data sets and all the different organizations are going to need to have those interfaces and those relationships. It's not a single place that the world's problems are going to be solved.
Yeah, I talked about it before, but I just want to agree with what Mike said, really, that we're not going to find one size fits all. The nice thing about SDA is, in terms of culture, culture is driven by people, of course. SDA has no people. It's a virtual organization. It's a tool for operators, and so if it needs to change or even to go away, nobody's career is going to be destroyed. So if that's the right thing to do, that's what will happen. So I think we're all going to just have to agree to try to be driven by what is the right thing to do to solve the problems we face. And we have to let go of our, if we can, of our organizational constructs and those that cultural barrier that keeps us rooted in older ways of thinking, because the problem set's just going to be too complicated for us to do the status quo forever.
I agree with everyone. In fact, I think the question is, who else is going to appear on this list that needs to work together? I mean, we should not be surprised. When space started, it was a military environment. There were only a handful of satellites, and it was run by the DoD. But now we're in an environment where it's commercial, it's science, it's civil, it's military, and eventually it'll be tourism and transportation. So it's a big problem, and it's not a one size fits all. There'll be a big marketplace. Some of it will be competitive, some of it will be complementary, and I think it's a question of how many more other players are here, and what other niches are there in this architecture.
I think it behooves the government to be open and sharing, to work out open standards, to be open to new sources, to maybe provide open software packages. But commercials, dog eat dog, let's be honest. I mean, you're out there, you're competing for market share. And so the reality is the commercial vendors are going to be working to lock down their areas and increase their market share. And that's the reality of the commercial market. It's kind of two-sided. And so I think you're going to see a lot of the commercial vendors working with the government to try and develop the standards and become open sources. But then after that, it becomes not in my backyard, and they try to protect their stuff. That's just what I've seen from these kind of markets.
Thank you. So this goes back to an earlier comment that you made earlier, Mr. Gleckler, and that's specifically when you were talking about commercial products. Let me go ahead and read the question. It's actually more of a statement.
Okay.
So we'll see where this goes. It seems to me that the viability of commercial data may very well be contingent upon the government as a primary customer to close the business case. And then there's reference to what you'd said earlier, that the data products are not yet refined enough for commercial customers to invest in or close the business case. So they would like to know what your thoughts are on that. I guess what I'd like to do is add to that question and say, so what needs to be done? Is there some commercial or civil or other investment that needs to be done there other than the government to refine those data products? And what exactly can be done to do that?
So First of all, don't take my remarks as being, oh my God, we can't do this. From my earlier statements, it was really, these are the issues associated with developing a new market. And so a big part of that is just trying to figure out how we deal with all of these issues. And also, when you talk about a new market, you kind of have to jumpstart it a little bit. And DARPA, I think, is doing under Orbit Outlook, they're trying to do that. We have, although we have more flexibility on some of our other contracts on that one, we're just the data provider. We're just providing data on that guy. And so the idea is that we sell it to the other members of the Orbit Outlook community. And so they're trying to get that whole market approach working in the first place. And what does it mean to take tasking from other people and provide data back to them? And so a big part of it is just working through the process and getting that started and getting the thought process going in people's head that they can go buy the data. As we saw when I did my little exercise, there's really no one out there buying data right now. There are lots of telescopes available. Okay, people can go point these at satellites and collect data. There's the potential for all the data that you could ever swallow, coming down the line. So it's really just getting the whole market going. Another problem with government customers is oftentimes it's very difficult for them to just buy stuff. If you don't set up like a GSA account or something along those lines, then they have to go through contracts, and that's a long process. It can be difficult and can be a little unwieldy. And so those are some of the things that we have to overcome also if we're going to be a commercial vendor. Can we work out something, maybe it's GSA or something along those lines. In the short term, I think, Andrew here isn't asking, hasn't been sending any little notes over to me as we've been sitting here saying, I need to buy some data from you. So I think the short answer is, it's probably the government at this point in time is the main user for that. Now, I think as we move forward and you're starting to see, things like AGI's products and other things, that people can have, JSPOC level capability without the JSPOC, you start seeing other players maybe coming into the fray later on down the line. Obviously, it's never going to go completely out of the government's hands. That's never going to happen. But will commercial play a bigger role in the processing? So I've got my order now. So I think in the short term, the government is the primary investor, and we have to work with. Fortunately, there's several groups within the government that are looking for data, and as we move towards, I think, more comprehensive space understanding and space, domain awareness is something Travis Blake liked to promote more so than SSA, but he really meant that to be that we really understand what's going on in its totality in space, not only where things are and how they're moving, but also what their intent is, things along those lines, that we start seeing a lot more work going on in this area, and all of it's going to require data.
Yeah, I like to weigh in on that. What makes a market, and this is going back to first principles really, is buyers and sellers, where the buyer's willingness to pay is some number above what the lowest number the seller is willing to sell it for. Everything has a value in the marketplace, and in the case of SSA data, it's dependent on the sensor, the geometry, the geography of it, right? I mean, there's a lot of things that go into contributing what the SSA value of any particular data set or combination of data is. So really, the market determines the price. The other comment I'll make is that for our CommSpock endeavor, we believe there is a commercial market for commercial SSA. There's observational data is one element of the overall system that's required. It has to be, I guess it's, you can't sell to people with an automobile crude oil, right? It has to be all put together and refined such that they can take it and make direct use of it. So data has to be processed, analytical products and standardized data services need to be formulated as well. And that's, as Tony says, that's the early market formulation. Those things need to be all worked out. That definitely is part of the formation of the market. So that's what we're trying to do with the CommSpot.
You know, being in a commercial enterprise, I'm a tech guy, you know, so there have been many times I've seen something I really wanted. It's cool. I just want to go buy it. But you know, being having to report to shareholders and being in the commercial world, the first thing finance asks me is, why do you need it, and what is it going to do for us, and will it bring us affordability? Affordability is, of course, the buzzword of the day. So you know, I think from the commercial side, no, they're not out there right now buying up hordes of data, buying hordes of services because they look cool. We have to have some test cases and demonstrate that there is affordability to them, either fuel savings or life extension, things like that. And as that becomes apparent to the commercial world, I mean, they are the bulk of space operations. And I think you'll see a transition from the government being the center and the central consumer of data to, in the future, a much broader market.
So I have a question for NASA. Have you considered purchasing commercial SSA data for your uses, or do you envision there would be a need in the future because NASA has invested in or incentivized industry in the launch industry for commercial? Has NASA considered that for SSA for your purposes?
So I have not personally been involved in anything at that level. To my knowledge, they have not, but I'm not positive. That's not to say that they never would. If there was a need for something and they thought that it would be helpful, they could certainly go out and make that purchase. But I mean, right now we're involved with SDA. We pay money to them to use their service. I don't think that's exactly the same as what you're saying about purchasing data, but
Right.
Similar case. They augment the capability that the JSPOC currently has, where the JSPOC doesn't screen one operator's EFEM against another's, so we're able to get that service from the SDA, so we've gone out and procured that. So.
Okay. What about the FAA in your needs in the future?
I think as we were as I indicated in my intro remarks, right now we're looking at that entire architecture, and what our requirements are. So I think in that trade space, everything is on the table in terms of us bringing on capability, in terms of whether it's data sources or analytical capabilities. We do intend to have a very strong partnership with our friends in DoD. But beyond that, you know, the other stuff, the make-buy decisions are all going to be on the table as we move forward. So I don't think we've come to the point of making firm decisions either way.
Okay. So I want to wrap up our session with this last question, and it has to do with what can be done to overcome the cultural challenges of implementing the National Space Policy, and obviously answer that from your perspective, from where you come from. What is it that you can do as an organization to overcome those cultural challenges based on some of the comments you had made earlier that there needs to be some change? So let's start with, you want to head all the way down?
So NASA often finds itself in the middle between DoD and the commercial side or other entities, and it's provided us with a unique opportunity to bridge gaps between the stovepipes that come up in different organizations, either between different parts of DoD or between DoD and the commercial side. And so we're able to be the middleman that brokers deals, if you will, so that everyone can benefit from each other's experiences without those walls in between the different organizations. So I like to think that that's one way that NASA has helped and can continue to help with that problem.
You know, whether it's implementing national policies or changing how your company or organization does business, you're really talking about a change management exercise across the board, right? And in some cases, it's a little more nebulous, so that if folks have the opportunity to interpret it the way they want to interpret it, they will, right? So I think it really leads to all of those aspects that deal with effective change management. And we heard General Hyden this morning talk about, gave a very important part of that is strong senior leadership in terms of the message, right? The policy is clear. We are going to do this. But at the same time, that has to flow down through. You have to find ways to, in fact, bring various players to embrace the change. You're always going to have some early adopters, make alliances with early adopters, make your illustrate the successes, highlight those, move to sway that middle that is swayable, right? And work with our honest brokers, as Lori just talked about. I mean, there are all the toolkits of change management are really what need to be brought to bear to implement these policies, which do rub sometimes against what is business as usual. Business as usual, whether it's in the government or sometimes in private organizations, those entrenched interests can be very strong. You got to find the ways to actually work to change what is the normal expectation. And I think we're in our commercial space industry today, we're seeing a lot of examples where those past practices or previous mental models are transitioning to different models that are working because they've been proved to work. Similar here.
Yeah, I think change management is the right way to describe it. The commercial industry's role, as Dasdi Livero was suggesting at this conference last year, is to apply that innovation, come up with those new ideas, move things forward. Commercial industry is unencumbered by a lot of the inertia and other complications of governmental entities, which are arguably necessarily that way for lots of reasons. And then there's initial inertia that's not there for any particular reason except that it is. So the role really is to show what is possible and then demonstrate the benefits and then apply, for lack of a better word, relentless pressure to try to move that needle, move the middle of the organization towards that progress. You know, that's we see that as an important role in our national security and in the protection of the space environment. So along those lines, when you walk out and turn right, if you stumble over some giant black monstrosity, that'll be our latest attempt at applying that relentless pressure and demonstrating what can be done. So.
Gotta hand it to Paul. He got the sales pitch in after all. Supposed to do, right? All right. So it's all about change management. It's hard. The nice thing, at least from a U.S. perspective, is that I think we have a set of senior leaders in DoD and elsewhere that recognize that change, or rather implementation of the space policy that's overdue, should happen. So I think the conditions are right for management backing of change. For those of you in the government, I know the system is not really set up to reward risk-taking and deviation from the status quo for what might not be absolutely perfect gains and wins. So I think part of it is overcoming our fear of failure, right? I mean, unlike DARPA, most of us don't work in elements where failure is an option. Usually in space, failure is not an option. But maybe we have to not be afraid to almost fail. And so I think it's about taking those risks and seeing where there's going to be benefit. We owe it to ourselves. What's also nice is internationally, the U.S. has changed or implemented its policy and has reached out to allies and other governments. So there's going to be pressure for change to the status quo coming from those intergovernmental partners as well. So I think there are some great opportunities, and we just have to lean forward and take advantage of them and reward the folks like AGI and others that are leaning forward and taking risk to try to deliver new solutions.
I
think we're in the process of change management. A few years ago, the idea of postulative of commercial data sales, was a theory. It was the future thing, and now we're talking about the mechanics of it. Same with international. We'd have international partners here. We'd talk about what's going on in the international arena, but now we're involved in actually discussions about how do we get data from international sources? How do we collaborate as a global space community? So we're in the process of that change management, and I think that's a good thing. It is about risk and benefit. I think from an industry perspective, what can we do? I think as a system engineer, as an engineer, we need to do a better job of defining what the benefits are quantitatively and definitively, as well as the risks, and have that conversation with our government customers and our partners. Because that is part of cultural resistance to change is not understanding what the true risks are, and just having a perception, but it's probably a false perception. So we should start to actually have a deeper conversation on this, and I think we'll get there. I don't think we have a choice. I think what's happening in space is going to push us that way, one way or another. Space is not going away. It's a central part of our culture, of our economy and society, and we can't, as the general noted, we can't afford to lose space and lose access to space. So we're going to be pushed in the right direction.
I think when change is necessary, which I think everyone in the room is pretty much in agreement that that's the case, it's either evolution or revolution, okay? And so far, the evolutionary process has been moving a little slowly to keep up with the changing conditions, and we don't want to go extinct. So there's likelihood that the speed at which commercial industry can work and collect data and process that is so much faster that we may get into a revolutionary sequence where General just finally goes, enough, let's just, okay, you guys, as an experiment, you guys go duplicate all the efforts that the JSPOC is doing in a commercial sense, and let that run. You can see a scenario along those lines at some point in the future where if the evolutionary process that they've been trying to make can't really step up, that something along those lines is going to happen at some point. There's going to be a snap and a break, and you're going to see some things being done in different ways with a visionary general who's willing to take those chances. And that's where I see, that's the crux as we move forward in time as to if that's going to happen or whether evolution can be forced fast enough on that process. But it's a very difficult one. It's very hard to do changes when you're in an operational sequence. And so, I don't blame the guys that are out there doing the operational stuff. They're working very hard, and there's a lot of smart guys doing that stuff. But it's hard to do the change and the operations at the same time.
I'd like to take the opportunity to thank each one of our panel members, so let's thank them together for taking their time out. And once again, I'd like to thank Amos and the Maui Economic Development Board for the time to be able to host this panel. And now I'd like to turn the time back over to Jean Skog, who's going to close this session.
Wow, that was a lot to take in. That was a great panel. Please join me in certainly thanking this panel, but also General Hyten and all of the moderators and panelists who came together to put this forum on. So